Good day traders, welcome to this week's RMD Weekly Market Overview. This week we have diligently prepared for you another technical market overview with plenty of good setups that we are confident will place you in a good position to catch some great moves. I'm going to let the disclaimer roll and I will see you back in the charts. We are starting by looking at the US dollar to South African rand. We are looking at the 4-hour time frame. And last week we mentioned that this area at 1710, this is the area where we faced overhead resistance from our diagonal. We mentioned that any rejection from this area will likely result in a pullback to what was last week's pivot at 1686. That is indeed what has happened, and then price even sold off further from what appears to be this mini, like a double top almost. And then we saw price finding some support right below the yearly RT pivot at 1655. Although looking at price, we can see that we did indeed close below that on Friday. And also, as mentioned, any close below this level will now result in the trend becoming more bearish. This means, of course, that should price continue below our 1655 level, the 1655 level will now become resistance, and that will probably take price lower towards the monthly S1 pivot at 1610. And the only way that we can then reverse this trend now again would be if we can get price to close above the monthly pivot at 1668, and this could potentially then give us a move higher towards this 17 Rand area. We are now moving on to the Euro USD. And last week we mentioned that trend has now turned bearish and that this area at 1.176 has now become an area of resistance. And this is exactly what we have seen happen last week with price coming right into this area and then getting rejected off this area. You can also see that that is where it met up with this 100 SMA on the 4-hour, and that is where we then rejected. At this stage, we are also seeing resistance tightening due to this overhead diagonal, meaning currently we are looking at this 1.174 level as our level of resistance. And any rejection from this level would likely force price into our weekly pivot at 1.170. And if price then closes or breaks below that level, that will take us even lower towards our weekly S1 and this area of support at 1.162. This is the area that I've indicated here in blue. Of course, if price were to get a close above our diagonal, that would firstly see price move back higher and then retest this monthly pivot level at 1.178. And that would, of course, also be an area to potentially watch for a short or a pullback to that breakout area, but best to keep an eye on price action if that were to occur. And quickly having a look at the economic calendar for the week. So later today we have the ISM non-manufacturing PMIs, that is at 4 o'clock. Then tomorrow we have a couple of events affecting the Australian dollar, the euro as well as the USD, and then that includes the European Central Bank President speaking as well as the Federal Chair. And on Wednesday, we have the European Central Bank President speaking again, and our FOMC meeting notes at 8 o'clock. And on Thursday, we have the Bank of England Governor speaking at 9:25, that's in the morning, and then some unemployment claims later at 2:30. And on Friday, we have this Australia event affecting the Australian dollar. So just keep an eye out on these times as they might affect market volatility. Moving on to the GBPUSD. Overhead diagonal resistance is still keeping price in check, with Friday's candle on the daily being an inside bar of Thursday's candle on the daily. This, of course, means that we'll need to keep an eye out at the high and low of Thursday's candle, and those are the levels at 1.295 as well as 1.283. And any break above or below that will potentially give us a breakout. And just looking at the breakout higher, that would take us potentially to our monthly pivot at 1.3, where we will also meet up with this 4-hour 200 SMA and this diagonal resistance line that we see there in this magenta color as well, all aligning at that same area. However, should we fail to break out from this area of resistance and we then move into our weekly pivot at 1.288, and if we then break below that, and of course below that 1.285 level, that will probably take us towards our weekly S2 pivot at 1.266. We're now looking at the Australian dollar USD. So last week we mentioned that a pullback to at least this 0.715 area being a distinct possibility, and this is exactly what price has done, and this is also now the area that is being contended. Price is trading below the monthly pivot at 0.719 and just slightly above the new weekly pivot at 0.713. These are also the levels to keep an eye out for in the short term, as a break either above or below these would give us our targets. A move higher could potentially give us a target of 0.727. That is the previous area of support where we broke down lower into this move. So that could be a potential target, or perhaps even where we will meet up with our 4-hour 200 SMA that used to be support, and that will no doubt now become some resistance. So that would be at 0.722. If we break below this area at 0.714 and probably more important, our weekly pivot at 0.713, the move lower could then take us towards the 0.707 level, and after some consolidation might even take us as low as 0.697. That is where we'll meet up with the monthly S1 pivot. And as with the other two USD pairs, the probability move is probably to the downside, yet it remains prudent to stay with price action to ensure you're not on the opposite side of the trend. We are moving on to the US 100 or the Nasdaq, and just looking at price, we can see that price has managed to expand its consolidation range by retesting this overhead area of resistance at 11,624, but in the process have also formed this rising wedge, which it has broken to the downside on Friday. And as long as we stay below our weekly pivot at 11,350, it's likely that we will see these lower levels of support being tested. These include our weekly pivots. So you can see we have our weekly S1 pivot at 11,080. That also coincides with the previous area of support. Below that, we have our weekly S2 pivot at 11,885, and then our area of the daily 100 SMA. So that would be an important area and probably the first target to really consider, and that is at 10,700, and that is just a area of projection from our daily time frame. And then below that, we probably have our full target between 10,550 and 10,610. That is the area between the monthly S1 pivot and the weekly S3 pivot. So those are your targets and levels to keep an eye out for Nasdaq. Moving on to Brent crude oil. Last week we mentioned to keep an eye out on two levels. That would be the support level at $41.40 as well as the resistance level at 43. And we said that any break below that could set a larger move in play. And that is actually exactly what happened. We can see that we never moved above this 42.60 level. In other words, we never got a chance to even retest that 43 level. But we did indeed break below our 41.40 level. And this actually set in motion this head and shoulders pattern. We can see that we actually had a very much extended right shoulder over here, but never really had a close above the head. So this is still a valid pattern, which indeed played out, taking price into this major horizontal support area at $39.90, which we did mention in our video. Price has then broken below that and currently finding some support on the monthly S1 pivot at 39. This area at 39.90 will now become the new area of resistance, and new bearish targets would include support at 37.35. But let's just quickly move to our daily time frame so you can see that better. So the new areas of or the new bearish targets would be the area at 37.55. So that is over here, and then the second stretch target would probably be at this monthly S2 pivot level at 55.88. Looking now at gold staged a proper W bottom last week, and that took us towards a target at 1,905, which is also the new monthly pivot. This has now created another possible setup with a break above this 1905 level. setting price up for a move higher towards this 1940, 1945 to 1950 area. And that is thanks to what appears to be a cup and handle formation. You can see this area over here with this little handle being the potential setup to keep an eye out for that projected price target higher. However, a close below the weekly pivot at 1,888 could potentially take price lower, and that will probably meet up with the weekly S1 pivot at 1,860, which is also the area of the daily 100 SMA, as you can see projected on the 4-hour over here. But just consider that it is possible that we see price perhaps just consolidate on this monthly pivot area at 1,005 with a few tests of a weekly pivot. But that's why I'm saying it's important to keep an eye out in this area between 1,005 and 1,888, as a break above or below these levels will set these targets in motion. We conclude this week's market overview by again looking at Bitcoin. Bitcoin still rejecting this 4-hour 200 SMA, as we saw happening on the 19th of September. We saw that happen again on the 28th of September, and then again last week on the 1st of October. We have also now rejected the monthly pivot, that is at 10,880, and that means that the levels to keep an eye out for would now be this monthly pivot, which has now become overhead resistance at 10,880. Also taking into consideration this new overhead diagonal resistance that's been forming, this line that we see in blue, and also considering that we have broken below this short-term lower diagonal that's formed last week. That is where we saw price break lower, and it's possible that we might still see a retest of that breakout area at 10,690. That is also where we see our 50 and 100 SMAs on the 4-hour. Any rejection lower from this area will take us firstly into our lower diagonal at about 10,380, perhaps a bit lower, depending on where we draw this line. But just quickly moving to the daily time frame to get a bigger picture of what might be happening here. So as you can see, if we break below this diagonal, the first price target would be the monthly S1 pivot at 9,700. However, should we manage to close above or break above this higher overhead diagonal, the area of resistance, as mentioned, would be 10,880, with the next test then being this overhead diagonal at 10,990. Well, probably you can just round it up to 11,000, and only a close above 11,000 will then again give us a new upside targets, which could be in the area of 11,650 to 11,945, which is the monthly R1 pivot. But at this stage, just keep an eye out for price action and to see how this consolidation resolves, as these diagonals, as mentioned, would be the key areas to keep an eye out for either break lower or higher. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Please let us know if you have any recommendations or feedback, as we love to hear from our viewers. Also, if you have not yet subscribed, please remember to do so, as we are making these videos available every week and don't want you to miss out. Until next time, this is John Jacobs for RMD Trader. Trade smart and trade successful.